Greetings and welcome to the German Institution's Lecture 2, the mini lecture. When I left you last time, I talked about how there were some similarities between the German system and the American system. The emphasis on civil liberties and rights in the Constitution, for example, a very strong Supreme Court, and American federalism. I also talked about how the German system has a lot of similarities with the British system, that it is a parliamentary system, for example, and therefore the head of state role is a ceremonial role that is played by, in England, the Queen, and in Germany by the President. And the chief executive in both countries is played by the Prime Minister. In Germany, we call the Prime Minister the Chancellor. One of the things that I pointed out at the tail end of the hour before the last mini lecture ended is one of the things that makes being a chancellor desirable is that there seems to be significant job security. For example, three German chancellors, three prime ministers have served more than 14 years. We have not seen a situation where a British prime minister in the last 100 years has served more than 14 years. We have not ever had an American president serve more than 14 years. And one French president served 14 years, and then the French changed their constitution to where now, realistically, in theory, a person could serve more than 10 years. But for the most part, the expectation is that a French president is probably only going to serve 10 years at max. So the German chancellor has greater job security and tenure. That's the first difference between the two prime ministers. The second big difference your book makes a significant point about, and certainly I would put some stars next to this in your notes. This is something that I will input an exam question on, and that is this German constructive vote of no confidence. And so in Great Britain, we talked about how there can be a formal vote of no confidence, but usually what happens is that a prime minister resigns, and it sometimes might take a little bit of time before a new prime minister emerges. I know, for example, when people ousted Mrs. Thatcher, the thinking was that one of the people leading the coup would become the new prime minister. Instead, Margaret Thatcher had enough political power within the party to where her choice of a successor, John Major, became the new prime minister. In Germany, this doesn't happen. In Germany, the constructive vote of no confidence has only been used on one occasion. It's in 1982, and that was when Helmut Schmidt was voted out of office, and Helmut Kohl became the new chancellor, and Kohl went on to be the chancellor from 1982 to 1998. So for a German chancellor to be voted out, the heir apparent is simultaneously voted into office at the same time, and it makes it less likely that a German chancellor is going to be ousted in a formal vote of no confidence. So that's the second big difference, is the vote of no confidence is different between the British Prime Minister and the German Chancellor. The third big difference is that every German Chancellor has had to preside over a coalition government, and this has been very rare for British Prime Ministers. It's happened twice. But the norm in Britain is that the Prime Minister is going to command a majority in the House of Commons, that majority is going to be of their political party. In this case, usually it's going to either be the Conservatives or Labour. They are the only parties that have governed on their own in the post-World War II era. On the other hand, in Germany, whether it is the Christian Democrats or whether it is the Social Democrats, they have needed a coalition partner to govern, and that means that they have to be very able politicians. When you have a second party governing with you, you're going to have to give up a certain amount of power. And I know for many years in Germany, when the Free Democrats were the alliance partner, the coalition partner in the 50s, 60s, and into the early 70s, what we almost always saw was the leader of the Free Democrats was the foreign minister, the number two person in the country. And so German chancellors are going to have to place a certain number of the other party in their cabinet. So they really do have to engage in negotiations and at least bring in some of the minor parties' ideas in order to govern. German chancellors, unlike their budget counterparts, can also veto measures. However, in the real world, this does not happen. It certainly doesn't happen very often because the executive branch cabinet leaders also serve in the Bundestag. They coordinate the wishes of the cabinet, the Bundestag. A majority of legislation that is introduced and passed in the Bundestag comes from the executive branch. But theoretically, that is a weapon that a chancellor can use that a British prime minister cannot. Now, obviously, they have a lot of things in common. Like British prime ministers, the German chancellor picks their cabinet. They have to defend government policy to both the Bundestag and the public. Also, like the British Prime Minister, the German Chancellor is seen as the primary formulator, the initiator of public policy. They are seen as the linchpin of the political system. And so they have a lot of those common roles. And the cabinet's about the same size. They oversee the major agencies of government. Roskin, I think, does a good job in pointing out that Angela Merkel doesn't seem to be the type that would rise to the top of the party ladder like in Britain. The way that you become the prime minister is that you are going to have to serve your time. You're going to have to be elected. You're going to have to serve in the Bundestag. You are going to have to serve probably as a junior cabinet minister, then as a cabinet minister before you rise to the top. And she did this during the Kohl government. She is a woman in a party that isn't well represented in the Bundestag. The Bundestag has, I think, right now 31% of the Bundestag are women, and yet the CDU, CSU, her party has less than 20% of their ministers are female. So sort of like what I talked about Margaret Thatcher, you may remember earlier in Britain. Remember when Mrs. Thatcher was prime minister, her cabinet was composed entirely of men. Now, Merkel has not been that exclusionary, and there certainly have been women represented in the German cabinet, but her political party has not represented women nearly to the extent that the parties of the left have, that being the Social Democrats, the Green, and most notably, the Left Party. Merkel is also a Protestant. She is leading an overwhelmingly conservative Catholic political party. She's been elected 4 times to head a party where she certainly looks like an unusual member of that party. The polling data is, despite the fact that she is not particularly charismatic, she is perceived as highly competent, highly capable. And right now, given some of the instability in the world in polling data, it appears that if the election were now, and it's not, the next election is not until next year, but certainly based on the polling data right now, it appears to me that she very easily could, and in my opinion, would become the first German chancellor to win a 5th term in office. And if she served a 5th term, and if she served that 5th term out, imagine that Germany would have the same leader in office for 20 years. That is unthinkable in the American political system. We had a president, Franklin Roosevelt, for 12 years. And as a result of the Roosevelt presidency, we changed our Constitution as a result. There appears to be no call for term limits in Germany, and I applaud that personally because I believe that term limits are called elections. And so I think that we made a mistake with the 22nd Amendment. I know that many people disagree with me on that, but I like the fact that the Germans don't have term limits on their office holders. Now, I want to update something that's in Roskin. It was, of course, correct when the book was published, but there has been an election since the book was published. So your book has 2013 as the last election. And I want to mention a few things that are relevant as an update to the Chancellor and to the Bundestag, which is going to be the focus of the next lecture. So the book discusses how, unlike the other countries we've talked about, the size of the Bundestag literally changes after every election. So there is a stipulation that the minimum size of the Bundestag is 598. So no matter what happens in the election, there is a minimum of 598 members in the Bundestag. In Roskin, it points out that after the 2013 elections, there were 631 members in the Bundestag. And this is due to the vagaries of their election. The German electoral process is one in which half of the members are voted in single-member constituencies. And the more important half is the half that's voted based on proportional representation with a 5% threshold. And what that 5% threshold, and I'll talk about this in a later lecture, but just to give you an introduction right now, a political party must win 5% of the vote nationwide, or actually win in a or several single-member districts in order to get representation. So if you are a political party and you get 4.5% of the vote, you don't get anything. You get 0 seats. On the other hand, if you get 5.5%, you are going to be represented and you are going to get at least 5.5% of the vote. And I won't get into the complexities of that. I call it the German style of the double ballot, because when you as a voter vote, you are voting for both a single member, a person to represent your constituency, but you are also voting for a political party. Now, usually they're going to be of the same party, but not necessarily. Imagine if we had the German election. We might be, let's say I'm a Republican today. I might be a Republican, and let's say I'm a fairly moderate Republican. So I vote for the Republican Party, but then in my district, there is a fairly conservative Democrat, and there's a very, very conservative Republican. I may actually vote for the Democrat to represent me in my district because I may believe that that single member may be a more moderating vote if I'm a moderate Republican rather than an extreme conservative Republican. In the 2017 election, the Bundestag changed size, and it changed dramatically. So instead of 631 members, which we had in the Bundestag after 2013, today, right now, there are 709 members. If you take a look at the cabinet, Merkel put together the cabinet, and as of right now, her party coalition, the CDU, Christian Democrats and Christian Socialists together, have 8 cabinet seats. And their coalition party is their major opponent, the Social Democrat. The Socialists have 6 cabinet seats in what Roskin calls a grand coalition. Now, Merkel is more free market than her party or her coalition party, and she wants to reform the welfare state, but the Social Democrats have basically blocked it.